Thanks for joining us. My name is Fermin Koop. I'll be the moderator of this side event. That's called Exploring Multilateral Approaches to the Just Energy Transition and Industrialization in the Global South. We'll be looking at the implications and conditions for a just energy transition and the industrialization in the Global South, focusing on human rights, governance, technology, and finance. Also discussing the multilateral efforts and trade policies to drive a fair transformation in the energy sector. For the ones that are joining us, there is translation into Spanish. So if you need it, you can take the headphones from our friends on the back. But we'll have speakers that will speak both in Spanish and English. So let me introduce to the panel that's joining us. Carola Mejia, she's a Bolivian economist. She has a master's on economic and development and a specialty in sustainable development and environment from the Institute of Social Policies in Holland. She has more than 15 years of experience as an advisor and consultant to public, private, and international cooperation organization. She works as the coordinator of the area of climate justice, transition, and the Amazon in Latindadd. Cristiane Ribeiro, she is the co-director of the Institute of Socioeconomic Studies in Brazil. Marius Tros, she's the senior policy advisor at both ends, based in the Netherlands. Jonathan Lubega, he's a policy analyst on agricultural trade at the Southern and Eastern Africa Trade Information and Negotiation Institute, or SEATINI, in Uganda. And Camila Mercure is the climate policy officer at FARN, which is the Fundación Ambiente y Recursos Naturales in Argentina. So thanks for joining us. Thanks to our panelists that will be together. We'll be doing a couple of rounds of Q&A with our panelists here, and then we'll open the floor for questions. But first, we'll start with Cristiane, who will give us a short introduction and a presentation on a case study that she's been working on lately. Cristiane?
Thank you. The Institute of Social and Economic Studies is an organization founded in 1979, based in Brasilia, which has been active on environmental issues since the 1980s and has been following the debate on climate issues since Rio 1992, held in the city of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Our intervention would like to draw attention to a few points that, from Brazil's perspective, seem essential to us at this time. First, draw attention to the Brazilian context and the COP30 taking place in the city of Belém, state of Pará, next year. In this sense, it is essential to contribute to the global debate in light of COP28 global stocktake in Dubai, which calls for a progressive transition from fossil fuels to the use of renewable energies. We have been acting in this debate in a qualified manner since 2019. Second, draw attention to the issue of fossil fuel subsidies. Our work on subsidies began in 2017 in a partnership with FARN, Argentina. In the case of Brazil, fossil fuel subsidies are 4.5 times higher than subsidies for renewable energies, according to data from 2023. You can see the research recently launched by INESC with an English version on QR code. Don't QR code. Third, the world has already hit 1.5 degrees this year, anticipating a situation that scientists were predicting would happen in the future. Therefore, the real context demands new models to deal which has already happening in terms of climate change and the need to manage successive crises on the one hand, and think up new long-term strategies on the other. It is therefore essential to act urgently and globally, since the crisis in global and crisis is global and interconnected. It is pressing to break the logic of supply and demand competition between countries, because this is taking place in an environment and profound inequalities within a failed system as a whole. Fourth, Brazilian civil society is demanding from the Brazilian government the reconnection of fossil fuel subsidies as an international issue. For this reason, it has adopted the slogan "No New Oil Wells" and is calling for climate finance to redirect harmful subsidies from the oil and gas sector towards mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage measures, and vulnerable population. 50, and finally, with regard to renewable, a more mature debate about its critical side is crucial. It is vital to address the negative impacts of the current business models of so-called renewable and radically reject any expansion of nuclear energy. On this subject, we can quote two exemplary cases. The first is about the wind energy. In northeastern Brazil, communities have faced abusive agreements and serious violations of human and environmental rights in the implementation of wind farms on land and sea. Livelihoods and biodiversity are being destroyed in the name of clean energy. And other case is about nuclear energy. In Angra dos Reis and Paraty, located in the state of Rio de Janeiro, indigenous communities, quilombolas, and riverside dwellers have been living in a state of nuclear insecurity since the 1980s, with unreported leaks. Nuclear energy is neither safe nor clean and should not be in the Paris Agreement. The challenge is extensive, but one thing is clear: there will be no real solution to climate change without respecting human rights and territorial justice. Thank you.
Many thanks, Christian. So thanks for the opening remarks. Now we are going to start with our Q&A. We are going to start off with Camila. So Argentina made the news this week, not for the right reasons, but we are going to be speaking here about the energy sector. Camila, could you tell us how Argentina is moving forward on its transition to renewable energy amid the expansion of critical minerals and fossil fuels?
Yes. Can you hear me well? Okay, perfect. So thanks for the question. So it is an easy task, but I will try to answer. So first, I think that it is very important to try to give you a context of our energy mix in Argentina. So we highly rely on fossil fuels. So our energy mix has a lot of gas, but then also oil and coal. And them contribute by 86%, but then we have a very small portion for renewable energy, so almost 14%. So of course we need this energy transition, and we have different instruments and laws. For example, we have a goal for reaching 20% of renewable energy in the electric sector. But the thing is that we have to reach this 20% by December 2025. So we are, I think that we are not doing a great job there. And also we have energy transition plan for 2030. And then we have this mitigation and adaptation national plan, which also have different measures and policies for renewable energy, especially wind and solar. And the thing is that, we have all these policies, all these actions, but we are going in the wrong direction, I don't know, like we had the GST the last year that said that we need to transition away from fossil fuels, but then we are kind of deploying new pipelines in our south, and then we are in our north, such as in Salta, Jujuy, Catamarca provinces. We have new mining projects for lithium. So, we have different variety of energy resources, but the thing is that we are focused for solutions such as gas and other alternatives, and also these mining projects are mainly for other regions, the global north. So I think it's quite challenging, especially because we need to transition as well as other countries and regions, but as well that we need to ensure energy access, among other things. So that's kind of the situation there. And thanks.
Thank you. We are going to shift topics for a moment, and we are going to go with Carola. So as we know, the main discussion here this year is the finance target. And what do you think are the key demands that the Global South is bringing into the table, and how they should be included in the target as part of the incorporating Global South perspective?
Yes, thank you for the question, Fermin, and thank you to the audience for being here. Climate finance is very important to implement and to really achieve a just transition. And in 2009, where the first climate goal was set, it was done without any estimation, or it was a random number chosen, but it was not because the global north the global north countries are the good guys. It wasn't a thing about solidarity. It was in the recognition of their common but differentiated responsibilities. They are the ones that are causing this climate emergency. They are responsible for 92% of excess emissions. So they had to respond to this, and they committed $100 billion to be mobilized yearly to global south countries for mitigation and adaptation. I will share with you the results of this, the implementation of that goal. But now we know the needs. Now we know that global south countries need between $4.3 and $5 trillion just to move towards renewable energies, for example. We need $1 trillion. It's not billions. So that's our first ask, I think. We need to set a new climate finance goal that is responsive to real needs of global south countries. Some global south countries are demanding $1.1 trillion yearly. Some global south countries are demanding $1.3, $2.4 trillion annually. And the civil society has also done this exercise, and we are demanding $5 trillion to be mobilized annually to our countries. Not only because of what we need, but also as a reflect of the climate debt they have with us. So the big demand we have is an improvement not only in quantity, but in quality. We have noticed a lot of problems with the climate finance flows in these years, and we can clearly see that we need new and additional money. We need debt-free money, which is something very important for Latindadd, for the debt justice movement. We need gender-responsive public money, mostly. We need better access also for the people that is being more affected by these climate impacts. that is not receiving the proper help. They are highly vulnerable, but they don't have direct access to these resources. There's also another very important demand that is related to include loss and damage as a sub-goal, which right now is something in debate. We really hope we can really establish a goal this year that can include a sub-goal for loss and damage, which is really important, especially related to reparations and all the damage that has been done in our countries that is representing economic but not economic losses as well. And we are really demanding the global north countries to respect the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, climate justice, because they are trying to use this process of the NCQG to dilute their historical responsibility. They say there is not enough public money to fulfill, to close this financial gap. So we need private sector, we need the philanthropy, we need the MDBs, we need more contributor countries, and they are trying also to reduce the base of recipient countries. So it is a very tough negotiation, but we really hope this negotiation can result in a fair climate finance goal that is defined this year and that respond to the needs of the most vulnerable groups that are being affected right now.
Great, thank you, Carola. And we are going to shift to Marius for a moment. So the other topic that has also been mentioned quite a lot on the first few days of the summit for the ones that have been here is the discussions around trade. On day one, countries try to adopt the agenda, which is a formal process that takes place every year at COP. But this happened at the end of the day, really late. One of the key discussions on the table was trade, mainly related to carbon tax from Europe. Why are climate and trade so interconnected, and can we expect more of these discussions coming up?
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be here. And maybe a little bit about the organization I work for. Both Ends is a Dutch civil society organization working with a lot of partners in the global south. And trade and financing and the systems behind trade and finance is what basically is our core business. And I think indeed you're very right to point out that trade and climate and the junction between trade and climate was right there on the agenda in the beginning days of this COP. Because what happened was that a couple of countries that is these days referred to as the basic countries, as far as I understood, namely Brazil, South Africa, India, and China, complained about the so-called unilateral restrictive trade measures that have been taken in recent years by the US and by Europe. So for instance, there's the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, and there's the CBAM, the Carbon Adjustment Mechanism in Europe. And what these instruments do is they're intended basically to advance a green agenda, a pro-climate agenda, because the one thing are measures to basically boost the green transition in the US, and the other one is a tax that the EU will start to levy on carbon-intensive products. So again, the goal there is to lower emissions. But at the same time, these type of measures, they do have a huge impact on the ground as well. They have an impact on other places of the world and in producing countries. So these two things are very interrelated. So, and also this is the case when you think about raw materials, for instance, the resources that we're going to need, for the energy transition. You talked about lithium in Argentina. I think that is a prime example, but there are so many other ones. And the fact is, these resources, they're unevenly distributed across the planet, right? So that almost necessarily implies that there will have to be trading between different places to make this happen. But the reality is this trade is still very unbalanced. The relations between North and South, they are still unbalanced. And we will run a real risk of replicating these same problems that we have seen and imbalances with fossil fuels when it comes to raw materials. And so I think the question really is, when it comes to climate and trade, one concerns, of course, the climate impact of trade itself, namely that obviously the transportation of products causes a lot of emissions. But then the second question of how are these resources distributed and how do we manage this trading system in a way that is actually equal and fair is really central. So for me, the question is who benefits from this green transition and from the extraction of these resources. And I'm sure we'll continue to talk about that in a moment.
Thank you, Marius. So we are going to move to another part of the world. And Jonathan, thanks for joining us as well. How do you think investment and trade policies influence the trajectory of economic development in Africa?
Thank you so much for the question, Felin. The way I see basically giving the context how trade and investment policies are shaped in Africa, we so happen to see countries in Africa, even a continent itself, being a soft landing. So it is an opportunity for many developed countries to come and shape the trade and policy landscape to what they refer to be the best practice and laws. And that, in fact, does not speak to the reality that would enable African countries, benefit from the trade-related issues, because we know that Africa has very many minerals. It has very many, open opportunities for them. But if we could have policies, laws and trade policies that are favorable, we could see enhancement in, the investments, coming up in Africa. Because when you really see, I'm going to give an example of Uganda. Uganda we have the new unilateral thing that came in, that is the EUDR, and that is the European Union deforestation. It came in and it found Uganda having a weak, law on coffee specifically, and there is no law specifically on cocoa. So you realize that that was a fertile ground for Uganda to lose the market. When you also look at the other laws that are coming in that do not allow, human rights, infringements and what from the European Union, it means that African countries are not able to attract investments. We also see we do not have our policies and trade laws are weak to the extent that they do not allow the extent of competition. The competition rate is quite low because of the low value that is added. Our laws have a very weak incline, or a weak connection to allow producers add value to their products. That comes because of the tax incentives that are given, as well as the high tax rates that come along with, added products. So it brings us to the extent of being, a commodity dependent, continent. And then, the laws, the trade laws and policies, if they're weak, we see the weak adaptation to technology and the ongoing trend. Africa is quite low and slow on adapting to the trade laws, to the investments that we really need. But if the policies and laws are very well coordinated and facilitate all this, we see Africa reviving and also taking up its space in the global trade space agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. So we are doing well on time, so we are going to do a couple of more rounds of questions. So we're going to move to Camila again. Camila was sharing us about the challenges that Argentina is facing in terms of the social and environmental impacts on extractive industries overall. What do you think are the approaches that we should consider to transform this new energy sector?
Well, first, I think that, this energy transition that we are kind of experiencing nowadays, I think that we need to add like a new approach, a social approach. We need to start talking about justice, social justice. So because what we are seeing in Argentina and many countries of Latin America, but as well in the global south, is that we are just changing the technology, like we are going to fossil fuels technology to renewable energy technology, and we are not taking into account local communities, ecosystems, access to energy. So I think that, of course, all the people who are here, I suppose that I think that we agree on that we need this energy transition, but it cannot be at any cost. So we really need to put the people, the ecosystems, biodiversity in the center. And having said that, I think that this approach of just energy transition, and of course that we need these just transitions in other sectors, but regarding energy transition, I think that it is very important to try to foment or promote or ensure this social dialogue. Inviting all the actors and sectors to the table and bringing up their necessities, concerns, circumstances, and then trying to elaborate and plan an energy systems that, of course, have benefits even for them and not just for, I don't know, like sectors or companies. So first, it is fundamental that we ensure this information and public participation. And of course, this point takes me to another one related with the free, prior, and informed consent of all the local communities and indigenous people, because all the energy projects are located in territories, so we really need to kind of give this conversation and consider their inputs and contributions and necessities. Then I think that it is very important also to think, or to think what kind of energy transition do we want. And for that, in Latin America and Argentina, we think even in FARN, for us, it is very important the concept of energy access. And when we are talking about energy access, this energy access should be continuous, stable, affordable, just. Because, for example, I know that in Argentina, but also in other countries, we have this energy access for the people, but then maybe like in rural areas, they don't have like this continuous, affordable, and stable access to energy. And nowadays, the energy is like the base for all the activities. So for us, this point, it should be kind of like the goal of this energy transition. And then there's another important point that we see here, and it's that it's connected with, of course, energy sufficiency and energy efficiency. So we know that in this energy transition, the electricity demand is going to increase. So we need to rethink our patterns, our models. We want the energy for what? For people, for different, I don't know, like industrial activity. So it is very important to try to rethink our patterns, our customs, and of course energy efficiency, because all these renewable sources, they are not going to be enough to try to take these all necessities of the people of our countries. And I think that in this point, it is, what happened in our countries, in, for example, Latin American countries, but also in Global South, is that the mining activities, for example, lithium, this lithium is for batteries, but it's not for energy storage. It's for, many times it's for electric vehicles. So I think that we really need to kind of structure again our our system, not just our energy system, also our system at a whole. I mean, this transformation, as said before, it should be in a broader context and in a broader socio-ecological transition. So, yeah, I think that's those are the main points that we wanted to bring here.
Thank you, Camila. So, Carola, I know you've done lots of research over the years over the challenges that Global South countries face in terms of accessing finance. What have you found?
Well, climate finance should be helping us, but instead it's creating a lot of problems. For example, 2/3 of these climate finance flows are in the form of loans. For Latin American countries, this number is 81%. So it is very worrisome to think about that, very unfair. And also because they are not highly concessional loans. Many of them are market-based, that have market-based interest rates. And there are some studies that says that the higher the climate vulnerability of a country, the higher the interest rate they charge you. So it's completely unfair. We are also very worried about how this climate finance architecture doesn't guarantee direct climate finance access for the most vulnerable groups. Most of it is through intermediaries or through central governments, and many times do not reach the people that is more in need. We also see a lot of imbalance between mitigation, climate finance, and adaptation. And in the Global South, adaptation should be a priority. We really need adaptation, climate finance, and it's receiving only 28% of the flows. We can also see that there are long, bureaucratic, and very complex processes to access these funds. Can you imagine that you need 5 years for one project to be approved by the Green Climate Fund? It's completely absurd. It needs to change. It needs to respond to the needs immediately because it is an emergency. We are suffering from the impacts right now, and this kind of very heavy structure does not help. We see also that after almost 30 years, there is not an agreed climate finance definition, nor one single methodology agreed to measure these flows. So there is no transparency. There are a lot of different methodologies. It's supposed to be additional to ODA commitments, but sometimes it's double counted. So there is no transparency about that. And we need to understand what climate finance is, and it should be the same for everybody, and it should be measured in the same way. And we see that the goal was set in 2009, so many years have passed, and Global North countries haven't delivered until 2022. They say they have reached the goal in 2022, but yeah, and we know it is just a little drop in the ocean of needs that this climate finance represent. And another thing that we are very concerned about is that Global North countries are promoting false solutions also related to climate finance. We heard the first day you were saying of this COP, how carbon markets are being approved and promoted, and carbon markets are a false solution for this emergency. Carbon markets are not going to solve the climate emergency. They are just going to give the opportunity to big polluters to keep polluting. If they offset their emissions, if they pay, and they can even get richer because of trading this kind of carbon credits. So it's completely inefficient, it's completely false. And we also heard, and we are also concerned about some other false solutions related to climate finance being promoted now. We know we are facing a debt crisis. There are around 60 countries highly indebted in the world that are also highly vulnerable to climate change. And what we hear in these negotiations and in other spaces of the UN are debt for nature and debt for climate swaps, like the big solution for both crises, and they are not. We have been analyzing from Latindadd side some of the recent debt for nature swaps, for example, in the case of Galapagos, and we found many problems related to these swaps, related to transparency, integrity, and risk for the national sovereignty, lack of participation of local communities in these kind of decisions. And after 1.5 years, we didn't see $1 being spent in conservation. So they are not even effective, and they are not effective also reducing the debt problem. So they are another false solution being promoted out there, and they are changing a lot. These debt swaps at the beginning were more bilateral swaps between two governments. Now they involve many intermediaries, high transaction costs, a lot of private sector interests, and new loans. So it's very complex. And we also hear that the private sector is going to be the silver bullet to tackle this climate emergency, but we know that is not the case. We know the private sector always invests in what they where they get profit. And we know adaptation, loss and damage is not something that is going to give them profit. So they are not interested in investing in those things. And I heard one day during some UN negotiations, a representative of United States saying, okay, we need to double adaptation finance. Let's create adaptation markets. So they want the markets and the private sector and the capital to really solve this crisis when these kind of logics are the ones taking us to this abysm, capitalism, extractivism, to put profit in the center of the decision. So there are many, many bad things. And in the NCQG document that is being negotiated right now, we can find these false solutions, even high integrity voluntary carbon markets. It is there. It doesn't have like the brackets, so it's completely agreed. And it's very dangerous because climate finance should not be understood as the carbon markets or other carbon mechanisms. But fortunately, this. And finally, there are other joint energy transition partnerships for this energy transition that have been problematic for some countries and that imply a lot of loans as well. So it is not fair. It is not the kind of money or the kind of help we need. So we are demanding here different things.
Thank you, Carola. So, Marius, going back to trade, we were speaking about the connections between trade and climate. If we reflect a little bit on how trade works, what do you think are the systems in terms of how trade functions that are preventing a just energy transition?
Yeah, thank you. So let's take a step back and think, so what do we actually mean by the word just energy transition, right? It's a concept that is very much in full swing. Everybody likes to use it. So let's get it straight. The way that we envision a just energy transition is a transition that is fair and equal, and where everybody has the chance to make one, and one that is not the just energy transition for the one part of the globe, but that means misery for the other part. And therefore, I very much echo everything that you said about who is that energy transition for and how should we design it. And I'd actually like to start with a quote from Antonio Gutierrez, which he made last week, commenting about the energy transition and resources and so forth. And he said, "Too often we see the mistakes of the past repeated in a stampede of greed that crushes the poor." And he was referring here again to the extraction of raw materials in the global south for the benefit of the north. And I will talk a little bit about the systems, the trade systems that are in place that reinforce the patterns that we see today, and therefore, in my view, will actually prevent a just energy transition. I will go into two of them. One of them is the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and the other one is bilateral investment treaties. So, as you know, the World Trade Organization, in its core, is meant to stimulate free trade. But essentially, it has, it's a global organization. It's probably the #1 organization governing world trade at this point, but it is heavily influenced by the West, and one might say dominated by the West, and it has a very clear ideological goal, namely to stimulate free trade, to foster trade liberalization and deregulation, and therefore to facilitate, the easiest exchange of goods over the globe. But this practices, and I suppose this ideology, can be at odds with a just energy transition, because it can exacerbate extractivist processes. For example, say a country that is very rich in minerals and raw materials wants to extract these and use it for its own benefit, it might actually want to keep these resources within its country in order to develop and also make that extra step up the value chain. And I think that's also what you referred to earlier. Because as we know, when you actually move towards raw materials exporting economy towards one that's producing processed goods, that will deliver you much more gains. And so, in other words, by facilitating this free trade, we're actually seeing that this is there's some tension there. And the same systems we notice when it comes to bilateral investment treaties. For instance, the ones that I'm most familiar with are between the EU and third countries. And again, we see the same process. The EU is very good at pretending that we want to foster win-win partnerships and deals that benefit the both of us. But often in practice, it turns out that the EU is more interested in gathering those resources that we lack, because we are extremely dependent on raw materials from abroad. In fact, I feel like European policymakers are a bit afraid, because when we're going to make the energy transition and the digital transition, we're going to need a lot of them. So these two goals are very at odds. And I think there's one case that shows this perhaps the best of all, and is the case of nickel mining in Indonesia. Indonesia is one of the largest nickel producers in the world. Nickel is very much needed for the energy transition because it's used for batteries and also to make stainless steel. Now, on the one hand, Indonesia has actually said we're going to keep that nickel in our country in order to develop that ourselves before we export it. They actually started an export ban on nickel. Now, this seems to be sort of in line with what the EU might want, namely for countries to develop and then maybe then buy those resources in processed form. But the reality is that the EU has actually taken Indonesia to the WTO to complain about so-called protectionist measures, and it is one of the major stumbling blocks in the negotiations for a free trade agreement between the EU and Indonesia right now. And so I think this serves as a very good example of how the trading regime as it is right now is maybe not fit for purpose when it comes to actually fostering a truly fair energy transition. And therefore, I think we should probably start reconsidering that.
Thank you, Marius. Jonathan, also speaking about trade, I wanted to mention a specific example. 3 years ago, the African Continental Free Trade Area was launched. What do you think have been the challenges or opportunities around this program?
Yes, thank you so much. Africa needs to restructure its market. And in rethinking that, Africa passed the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is a tool to enable Africans trade within Africa, and also Africa solving its own African problems. And that could include the trade, the trade blocks and all those. So I think the most opportunities that we see that the African Continental Free Trade Area is bringing is the intra-trade within African countries. When Africa has built a number of blocks, we have the East African community, the SADC, the COMESA. So all these blocks, they are looking at having intra-trade within, Africa and also those blocks. That's an opportunity that we see. Then we also see economic diversification. As an African country, many African countries have different, opportunities within them. And if we see, for example, Uganda, rich in agriculture, it could easily feed and diversify its opportunities from another country that is producing other products. And also in developing the African Continental Free Trade Area, we see diversification in value addition, industries coming up to enable Africans have the kind of products that they need as themselves. Then we also see job creation. Africa is among the poor countries, and the poor countries, the lack of jobs. The jobs could be there. Others, they don't have no jobs. I mean, they don't have job security. So if we develop these opportunities, the African Continental Free Trade Area, we could see an enhancement in job creation among the youths, especially, and the women that we see that are struggling in Africa. But then we also have different challenges that we see that deter the development of this, because since it was passed in the before actually COVID-19, it met the COVID-19 that affected its progress, and it's also still struggling. Also, it is still having challenges of the non-tariff barriers that are brought in by all countries that, the interests that they see, as you see, the protectionist measures that different countries bring in. So whereas we are looking at the African Continental Free Trade Area, there are also, those challenges. The infrastructure itself is not fully developed. Those are the challenges that we see. We see also the capacity. Whereas we look at the negotiations, even here, when you see the negotiations capacity of African countries is very limited, and also the capacity themselves of negotiating something takes quite long because of the technical capacity that Africans lack. So the other big challenge that I would see that is affecting African countries in developing its trade through the the African Continental Free Trade Area is the strong informal sector. I wouldn't even say it's so much, but I see it is a strong informal sector whereby the businesses are informally managed, informally, coordinated and all that. No record keeping, no what, and also the value addition is limited. The informality in itself is still a big challenge that would facilitate the African Continental Free Trade Area to drive Africa into these global evolving trends and agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. We are going to do one more round of questions and then we'll open the floor. Camila, we've been speaking of the social and environmental challenges in Argentina regarding the extractive industry. And Argentina is actually one of the countries that signed the Escazú Agreement, which, for the ones that don't know it, is Latin America's first regional environmental treaty. How relevant is Escazú in terms of improving participation and information access, and how is its implementation moving forward in the country?
Well, thanks. So to start with, this treaty is very important for the region. I mean, one of its aims is ensure or improve the access to information, participation, and justice in environmental issues or matters. So for us and for the people and NGOs and other sectors and actors that work in environmental matters, it is very important. But the thing is that first, we need to know that, for example, like energy sector, the industries have more information. I mean, so there we have this information asymmetry that is very important to try to handle. And then what happened with us in the past years is when you have this new energy project, for example, for fossil fuels or even for lithium or other minerals. We have this public consultation for, all the people who wants to participate can do it. But the thing that in the past years, we realized that, for example, the first turns are for these companies. I mean, even fossil fuels companies or mining companies. So it is very difficult because you start this consultation with the point of view about the importance of this activity for our development, or even because they say that it's going to attract different foreign capitals. And then what happened also is that local communities or even NGOs have the last turns, and sometimes happen as well that we missed the turn. I mean, we don't know why, what happened, but then it says like, no, you missed your turn and you're going to like the last turn, and maybe it's like at 3 a.m. So nobody's going to listen to you. So I think in Argentina, it's, I mean, we have this big challenge. And of course, I mean, one of the challenges is that we really need this consultation and participation. But then another one is that we are kind of losing this accountability and transparency. And nowadays, it is very important, even in Argentina, when we have more and more fossil fuels projects, and also more and more mining projects for example, lithium and other minerals. So that's happening now. I mean, we are pushing with local communities, indigenous peoples, other NGOs, but it's not a easy context, I know, you know, and just that, thanks.
Thank you, Camila. Carola, so when we speak about finance here at COP, what are the options that we are seeing on the table to fund an energy transition on the Global South?
Well, among the demands of Global South countries, of course, I already mentioned that it should be grant-based public money, mostly, because otherwise it's not fair for us. And we usually hear, as I mentioned, that there is not enough public money. That's the narrative of the Global North countries to defend what they want to defend. But we know the money is there, but it's going to sectors that are harming instead of helping. They are going to military expenditures. 2.44 trillion in 2023. They are going to fossil fuel subsidies that are part of the problem and a bad incentive to keep in this dirty industry. $7 trillion in 2022. They are going to tax havens. For example, $30 trillion are in financial assets in tax havens. That's a way of evading this kind of taxes, and it should be going to public income. There's also tax abuse for $480 billion per year. So the money is there, but we need to redirect this public money to the climate agenda. That's one of the main demands. But the civil society has other demands here, and we already spoke about the debt problem, the debt issue, and I want to mention that the higher the debt, the higher the dependence on extractive sectors in our countries. We already heard what is our reality. With my country, Bolivia relies on gas exports. Now it's highly indebted, and their reserves of gas are going down, but we are going to the mining or gold mining with a lot of social and environmental impacts. And yeah, the higher the debt, the less money is going to really to just transition. So we need debt cancellation, debt relief initiatives in place. Next year is going to be very important because it's going to be 25 years after the first Jubilee process. In the first Jubilee process, promoted by the church and civil society organizations, some debts were canceled. My country was part of that in that process. And I think we are in a moment where the climate emergency is putting a lot of pressure in our countries, and we need debt cancellation. We need debt cancellation, especially for countries that are affected by extreme climate events and cannot recover. Right now, they are losing everything, and they have to recover with more debt. That's the way it's working. And for example, Latindadd is also proposing different things that are not being discussed here in these negotiations of climate finance. For example, new issuance of special drawing rights with our mechanism to respond to crisis. After the pandemic, $650 billion were like disbursed. It's like extra money created to tackle the emergency. Unfortunately, it is a mechanism within the IMF that in that moment didn't create a debt. It didn't represent any conditionalities, but it was fairly distributed. 2/3 went to the Global North, 1/3 to the Global South. The Global North didn't need that money. They didn't use it. They are rechanneling through loans, same recipe as always. Debt as the new colonial mechanism, but the Global South really used that money, and Latindadd made a research on what happened in Africa, in Latin America, and they were very important resources. So why don't we issue more special drawing rights for this agenda that is so important, and we know it has a big financial gap. But there are another things regarding, for example, tax justice. We can tax the wealth. And that's something that is being discussed right now in the G20 in Brazil. Brazil is promoting this kind of instruments to tax the rich people, because at the end there is a lot of unbalance. 1% of the world's richest population generate twice as many greenhouse gas emissions that the 50% of the poorest population. So there's a big thing there. We are also thinking about taxes to fossil fuel corporations that are the ones making billions of profits. In 2022, four fossil fuel companies did a profit of $164 billion. So we need to tax them, really need to make them accountable of what they're doing. And we are talking about also a reform in the international financial system. We need multilateral development banks and the financial system to stop funding fossil fuels and to really redirect these funds in a highly concessional way to the countries that need to do these transformations, not only an energy transformation. We need a general transition from an economic system that has proven to fail to a different economic systems. And yeah.
Thank you, Carola. So Marius, I'm going to take you to a specific case study. In October, ExxonMobil sued the Dutch government over a gas field closure. Why is this case relevant? What kind of lesson does it bring for the rest of the world?
Well, I think there's a lot we can learn from that, but I just want to say, or I just want to suggest, basically, maybe we could already open the floor for some questions, because I do realize that we have been there was a lot of technical information that we've been supplying you with, and I'm afraid that my what I'm going to say now will not be much less technical. So I just wanted to see if perhaps there are any questions from the audience already. Given that it's 7:30 and I realize you've probably been hard at work all day already.
Sure. Do we have any questions at this point? Yep. There's gonna have the microphone over there.
I just want to I don't know if it is because I've been in this field for decades already, and I'm listening all you know, I think, wow, seems to be the same. Seems that we are in the same discussion, demanding the same things toward governments. We are following all these multilateral debates without go further and try to really build examples that can really change authorities or the capitalists' minds in order to have what we really need to save the planet, to save our lives, etc., etc. And on trade, it is like I was 20 years ago, Doha round, you know, the same questions, the same inequalities, and about Latin America, we are demanding the same. How can we escape from this trick situation? How? What are the solutions? Because we have the solutions, technically speaking, but how to move forward and press sufficiently that makes those who have the power understand our demands, you know? It is the tragedy that is starting already in Brazil, in Spain, in other places that are destroying lives, livelihoods, everything. You know, that's what would be our analysis or our and not more than a strategy, more than strategy. How can we envision solutions in order to capture the possibility of survival? That's my question.
Yeah, I can say a couple of things about that. I think the main difference between now, and I do realize, you know, that we've been probably in the same loop for quite a while, but I think the difference between now and then is that now we know. We've seen, you know, how it played out in the past, and now we have a real chance to change these systems, or at least when I'm talking raw materials, for instance, I feel that we are still in time to shape where that is going before it's too late. And I would also like to, and I think maybe it's also nice to end the day or on a more positive note. I mean, what I was going to talk about next, that I will now not do, not to bore you too much, is about investor-state dispute settlement, ISDS, another very notorious trading instrument that is used basically to by big corporations to sue governments. It's mostly governments in the global south that suffer the consequences from this. And one thing that the trade movement in Europe has managed in cooperation with partners from all over the world is to get the EU to actually cancel or to retreat itself from a treaty, a very damaging and damaging treaty, the Energy Charter Treaty. And the EU, after years of campaigning, has said, no, we're not going to accept this anymore. We're not going to sign these deals with ISDS in it anymore, and actually stepped out. And I think that's a great example of how, there is progress. Whether it's enough, I don't know, but this is shifting billions of euros away from fossil fuel projects. So I think there is some progress.
And something else that is different from then is that extreme climate events, for example, are 5 times more frequent and more dangerous now. And we can clearly see that. And I think we are having a little bit more of this kind of awareness in the population about these things. And what we need is political will. That's clear, and that's what we don't have. And that's the big challenge in this kind of spaces and always. But I think we need to build strong social movements. We need to be more radical. We are here and we don't believe much in the results of these processes, but we have to be also in the streets. We have to be supportive of the struggles and all the demands and protests of the groups that are in the front line of this emergency, because we are running out of time, and that is the big difference now. It is becoming a real emergency and we are not responding. So we need to be more radical, and we need to be here in the streets. We need to do a lot of advocacy, a lot of pressure, but we also need our civil society, our population, to choose political leaders that could solve the problem. And that is something we're very, very, very afraid of. We have Trump now, that is a climate change denier. We have Milei in Argentina, which has asked. Yeah, we had Bolsonaro. So I think we need to also to choose politically wise to really find these real solutions. But we need to really show also the false solutions and how dangerous they are.
We had another question, I think, over there.
Yes, my name is Madeleine. I'm working for Miserio, a German development organization. My question to you would be, we have G20 closing tomorrow. What would be your hope or your expectation, how the result of G20 is also influencing the NCQG discussions we are having here? And then some of you mentioned sufficiency. Yes, so how can sufficiency be one of the solutions that is also leading to more democratic approaches and also to more ownership of climate change solutions?
Yes, thank you for the question. I really don't know how this is going to result. Tomorrow we will see the final document of the G20 process. We know the climate agenda is important for this Brazilian administration that is in the presidency of the G20. They are trying to get this political will to really solve the crisis. And and they are going to be presidency of COP30 next year. I think they want to solve the NCQG process this year. They don't want to deal with climate finance issues next year. And they have interesting proposals, as the one I mentioned, for example, to tax the rich. And they are going to implement those kind of measures in their territory. I think they are giving bad signals with the carbon markets, but I think they can have a good leadership with Colombia and other countries. I think the negotiation within the G20 is going to be difficult because we know the historical climate debtors are there trying to keep the status quo, no changes, no systemic changes and transformations. And we have some countries that are trying to push for it, that are on the global south. And I really hope they can get some good result tomorrow. We will see.
Well, thanks. It's a very good question. I don't have the answer in either, but I think that, I mean, of course, we need to balance this energy access. And of course, we need to, I mean, when we are talking about this energy sufficiency, we need to think about this overconsumption. So we need to try to think about like long-term planning strategies, and we are not very used to in our. I mean, I think that maybe in all countries that we are not used to these long-term policies. So I mean, I think that it is very challenging, even for me. For I mean, of all of the people that are here, I think it is very difficult to try to rethink about our consumption. But of course that we need policies for that. And I mean, I don't think if it is possible a word with this energy transition and this overconsumption, because we have energy and of course other ecosystem boundaries that, I mean, if we don't have, we cannot create that. So I think that, yeah, it is very important to try to think and elaborate these long-term strategies and planning.
I think we had a question on the back.
Yes, so my name is Sena Aluka. I come from Togo, young volunteer for the environment, long-time partner of both ends. And also I'm CAN Energy Working Group co-facilitator. So happy to be here. Thanks for the great discussion. I was expecting, in the context of the just transition, I was expecting discussion around the critical minerals that are out there that is needed, plenty in Latin America, plenty in Asia, even more abundant in Africa. What is the best deal you advise our countries, our government, municipalities in the context of the new negotiations? And going in the sense of what the lady just said previously, I think there's too much negative energy around about things not going well. And we end up all dying, get sick and dying before they realize whatever they want to do. Can we be more positive about solutions that are out there? I was on Deutsche Welle this morning. They asked me, can Africa survive without, if there's no money coming from the north? And I said, big yes. So can we focus on solutions? Great to talk today about multilateral approaches. Are there some citizens-led approaches that we can focus on in the context of these just transitions? How can we bring citizens from Asia, Latin America, Europe together to devise new ways of taking or doing an old business on our own new rules, fairer rules, that can also advance the just energy transition? Merci beaucoup.
Merci à vous. I think fantastic questions. I mean, I wouldn't say that they have the answer straight away, but I think I guess just something maybe to start the discussion is what I have learned a lot from working together with FARN and your colleagues on lithium mining there, and exchanging those experiences. When, for example, interacting with partners who live in the African context or in the Asian context, because you do realize that a lot of these processes, they're very much the same. So I think there's probably also a lot we can learn from each other in that regard. And am I wrong? And sorry to put you on the spot, because like I said, I'm not completely sure, but for instance, do you feel that there are sort of positive examples or examples of lithium mining projects that so far that have taken the rights of the communities and so far into account, or do we have to conclude that so far the story is mostly negative?
No, don't worry. I mean, I think that we don't have, sorry. Yeah, I mean, yeah, Bailey saying no. So yeah, I'm sure that we don't have. I mean, we have many problems there in Argentina, in our north, with mining. I mean, not just destruction of ecosystems, as well, like with the human rights of local communities. So yeah, I mean, I can, I mean, I wish, but I cannot tell you a good example. So sorry. Maybe other colleagues.
No? I mean, let's keep in touch about this because it's something that I would love to explore further myself. I've had questions. Literally, someone last weekend came up to me saying, "I know someone in Uganda with a large tract of land where they have found these minerals, and he's asking me." So this was not me, but asking this guy I spoke to, asked me, okay, but he wants to do responsibly, but just can we please tell him how? He's just looking for guidance, you know? So I can completely understand where that comes from. And so I would say let's stay in touch and see if we can come up with a good advice.
Well, I think it depends on how you look at it. If you are a country with this kind of minerals, like mine, Bolivia has a lot of lithium as well. You can see it from a good opportunity for business at the international level, but you can also think about a different approach. For example, in which consider energy a fundamental right for your people instead of a commodity. Then you break this extractivist way of thinking that we have. And my country has that problem. It has been building big dams and everything, thinking about how to export that energy. And it's always that kind of idea that we have. But you have people that is being displaced, local people that doesn't have energy. So you have to think different about a just, popular, and inclusive transition for your people. Without deepening extractivism practices, without perpetrating or replicating injustices from the current energy system, without putting in risk food or water security. For example, local communities in my country are suffering from these impacts regarding water security because of the lithium production. They need a lot of water. It is water intensive in my country to exploit these resources. And it shouldn't represent that kind of displacement, violation of human rights. And that is why it is important to think from our approach and our realities, what do we want to call a fair, popular, and inclusive just transition?
Maybe you've triggered me to speak to what Uganda is, and in that capacity, Uganda minerals or anything that is mineral related is government property, and whenever it cannot be your property, regardless of whether it is found on your land. So that I think the onus is on the government to draw clear laws and policies that will facilitate just transition for their people. For example, we have currently we have oil that has been that is yet to be extracted, and then we also have gold that is actually ongoing in its extraction. But then when they find anything to do with, that's our laws. That's how our laws are. Any mineral found on your land, it is government property. So the issue is, how does government cater for people who are affected as a result of those minerals or extraction that is conducted? That is the big question. That's why we see the rampant land evictions without compensations. That's why we see lots of injustices that are happening at the site of the government, because oftentimes it is government property and government has limited interventions in terms of laws and policies to protect those people while transiting. And most times I have what is now being said is, maybe to go back to the discussion, is can Africa pollute its way to development? And that's one of the big questions that is coming as other countries, the developed countries, are putting up a discussion and narrative that we need to, go green. And what causes all the carbon emissions and all that is the minerals that Africa has started now discovering. So the question that has left many African countries to dissolve is, can we leave it in the ground or we extract ourselves to development? That is the big question. And if it is answered in affirmative, then we shall see Africa's transition being really realistic. And if we don't, then that's when we shall experience the continuous aid dependence, continuous commodity dependent, and all those, that the related issues that come along with poverty and agony that we see.
We have one last question and we are running out of time, unfortunately.
Hello, my name is Daniela. Thank you for your panel. It's been really insightful. COP28 agreements requires countries to phase out fossil fuels, double energy efficiency, triple renewable energy capacity. But in global south countries, we know that it's like really hard to achieve those goals because we still rely on fossil fuels. There are energy poverty levels are really high. And we also, even if we are moving towards renewables, if we do it like a rapid shift, is going to increase costs and even reduce reliability of some of the energy accesses that we have in the countries. So I'm just maybe wondering, what are the resources, strategies, partnerships that you think are missing in order to meet this goal while also addressing the energy poverty or all these challenges that these countries are already facing nowadays?
Do you want to ask your question and we'll take both?
So I'm Bettina Dur, I work for Fast in Action, and one of our networks have been talking a lot about just transition, and like some of us work on climate issues, some work on mining, and it's like we're trying to get these two things together. Like, how do we make sure we don't trade one kind of human right against another? Like, how do we kind of get these two things together? And yeah, like maybe just what you were saying, like about these, like, could you maybe elaborate a bit more on like the fundamental rights and like kind of the need for it to be in a local context? Like what do you mean by, like, how could we kind of get there in practice?
Thank you. So we'll take a few answers. We got 9 minutes, so please be brief. Anyone? You want to start?
Well, I will try to go a little bit more into what we were saying. We have to really look for a different approach. We need to make our local communities be part of this new governance regarding energy transition. They have been excluded, they have been sacrificed because of the current energy system. Sometimes, and from the countries we come, our governments allow oil extraction, gas extraction, even in natural reserved areas that are inhabited by, for example, indigenous communities that don't receive the benefits, that don't participate in these decisions, that are not even consulted about these kind of activities. So we need to think differently. We need to not replicate these kind of injustices. We need to make them part of this governance. We need to eradicate energy poverty. We need to focus at the local level. And Latindadd and other partners are working to find transformative alternatives, transformative economies, because we consider it is possible. And we have found that in our territories, there are some local communities that are practicing different approaches to capitalism, extractivism, and they are creating local economies. And if you provide, for example, some support regarding, for example, energy, solar panels to extract water, or to help them in their productive chain of production, you can also create these kind of transformations at the local level. And that is what we need to also make our governments understand. That is why I was asking them to think differently, to think in a different approach, and not only in this extractive approach that is being, it hasn't been responding, and it has just been creating inequality and a lot of social and environmental impacts. I don't know, it is difficult.
Thank you, Carola. Can we take an answer on the first question, if possible? Yeah.
I'm going to give it a try, even though it was a really good and not so easy question, I'm afraid. I think one thing that I can mention in this context is something that we have been advocating for and this is in the case of usually European funded or supported projects, right? Because that is mostly where we do our advocacy. That is where I feel that I have a role to play, where I have a certain level of influence anyway. And that is the question of when you develop a new project, the question of making basically what you mentioned in free, prior, and informed consent is extremely important to make sure that local communities are first of all even aware what is going on, what project is being developed, but also who are the financiers behind it, who are supporting these type of projects. But we would go one step further, and this is something that we have been advocating for, especially when it comes to raw materials projects, and it's something that we have been calling, even though it's not a generally accepted definition, we have been calling some just energy transition analysis, a JET analysis, where we would want to require European funders and donors to make an analysis of, okay, so what does this project actually mean for the communities on the ground? Are they benefiting from this project? Is there a matter of local content, for example, but maybe even more than that, are they benefiting from the renewable energy that might be produced, or the minerals that are being extracted? For instance, what we're seeing now with hydrogen projects that are being developed, for instance, in Northern Africa, but mostly for the benefit of Europe, is that this hydrogen is produced locally in a fantastic and maybe in renewable manner, but then that hydrogen is all shipped abroad, and so the local people, they don't benefit at all from something like that. So I think that is maybe one way to set the conditions for just a little bit fairer and more equal energy transition.
Thank you. Camila, 1 minute, please.
Yeah, just one comment. No, I think that, we are very used to think like these energy systems, like huge and big, like, I don't know, solar parks. In Argentina, we have, I remember that we study a small city in one province. They install like a small solar park, and all the neighbors, the university, the different sectors and actors in that a small city were involved in this planification and in this energy planning. And nowadays you can see that they don't need to buy energy, so they are consuming their own energy. So I think that we really need to start focusing in these small solutions, like local solutions, and then like start like these bottom-up processes. So we are very used to these monopolistic energy systems, and I think that it's not like the solution that we need nowadays, and in order also to achieve this just energy transition, because we have that, the different communities and territories have different, of course, like context characteristics, even climate elements, like, temperature, wind pressure. So I think that we really need to try to focus in this like a small and small solutions and just that.
Thank you, Camila. So we are going to wrap up because we ran out of time, but just a round of applause for our panelists here. Thank you. So you have 2 QR codes there. If you want to scan them, you can follow the work of FARN and INESC right there. But thank you for joining us. Have a great rest of the day and end of COP. And our panelists will be around if you need to ask a few questions. Thank you.